The night we experienced something that left our whole family in shock was 2017. Thanksgiving, a cold night in November. The air was crisp, and the scent of roasted turkey was all over the house as we gathered for our annual Thanksgiving dinner. It was a night of warmth, laughter, and family, or so I thought. We were hosting the dinner at our house that year, and I insisted my father to call every member of our family. My parents called everyone, and they agreed to come except for a distant cousin of mine who didn't respond to any of the texts or calls. We assumed he might be busy, and we enjoyed the night with all members who came, unaware of the chilling events that would unfold that night. Our family had gathered at our ancestral home, a creaky old mansion that we lived in and was rich with the memories of generations. We sat around the table, sharing stories and passing dishes, a dining of familiar faces and loved ones. Yet, one seat remained empty. It was my cousin Jared's place, who didn't respond to anyone else and was allegedly missing. He was always a bit of a private person, so it was likely of him to miss a family gathering, especially on Thanksgiving when there is a crowd of people around. Yet everyone was concerned, and my mother tried calling Jared repeatedly, but he didn't answer. As we began to accept his absence and settle into the festivities, a sudden swish of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the dining table. The doorbell rang, a sound that reverberated through the silent house, and all of us started looking at each other. The timing was eerie, considering we had given up on Jared joining us. My uncle, his father, rushed to answer the door, and as the door creaked open, everyone had their eyes locked on it. There stood Jared, his silhouette barely visible against the inky darkness outside. His disheveled appearance sent shivers down my spine, and his eyes reflected an emptiness that chilled me to the bone. He stepped in and didn't seem fine. His gait was unsteady, as if he was being controlled by unseen hands. "Jared, where have you been?" "We were worried sick," my aunt exclaimed, rushing toward him. But he remained silent, a haunting silence that hung in the air like a dense fog. As we brought him to the dining table, the atmosphere shifted. The warmth of the room went cold. Jared's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. He picked his food and ate it like an animal. His eyes were vacant and distant. It was making it difficult to ignore the discomfort that settled in the pit of our stomachs. The unease deepened as he started mumbling something that none of us could understand. He seemed to hint at something that was far more sinister than what we were looking at. It was as if he had glimpsed into a demonic realm and brought back something dark. Midway through the meal, the lights started to flicker. Jared had food all over his mouth, and he was staring at every member of the family with anger and rage filled in his eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence within him was not Jared anymore. His movements became increasingly erratic. All of a sudden, plates on the table began to quiver and then collapsed on the floor. All of us stood up. The once joyous occasion had turned into a nightmarish drama. Jared stood up as well and ambled towards the main door. Every one of us was looking at him as he stood up. Instead of leaving, he began whispering something incomprehensible. He was standing in front of the main door, continuously tapping his head on the front door, and murmuring something that none of us could understand. Every one of us started feeling uneasy, but no one had the slightest idea about the horrifying truth that awaited us ahead that night. The air was growing heavier, and the hall, which had echoes of family talks just a moment ago, was now screaming the symphony of silence. Silence took over the place. and all of us looked at each other with expressions of fear dripping down our faces. The air started to grow heavier as Jared stood there in front of the closed door, and his whispers scared us. Someone had to step into this situation, so my uncle stood up and got close to him. As he tried to pull Jared towards him, Jared fell unconscious on the ground. Then all of us got close to him. One of my cousins, who was a doctor, checked him and told us that his medical condition was inexplicable, and she can't say anything until she had proper medical equipment. She told us Jared was unconscious and needed medical attention, so we called 911. My uncle and I took Jared to one of the rooms till the help arrived. For some reason, no one could stay inside that room. Maybe it was because of the terror of that situation. I was the only one standing beside the bed that Jared was lying on. I got close to him to hear if he was breathing. As I got close to his face, his eyes opened abruptly and they were red with anger. I got flabbergasted and fell to the ground and started screaming. My uncle entered the room and asked me what had happened. When I told him, he went near Jared and said, "I think you are tired. Jared is still unconscious." I got up and saw that Jared's eyes were closed. After that, I didn't have the courage to stay in the room, so everyone left the room for some time, and later when the ambulance arrived, we all gathered outside Jared's room, expecting him to be resting inside. As we got into that room, we saw that the window of the room was opened, and Jared was nowhere to be seen. My uncle and father exchanged worried glances, but no one had the merest idea of Jared's whereabouts. Uncle went outside to find him, but couldn't find him anywhere near the house. All of us spent that night in a tormented state that Jared left us in. None of us had a minute of sleep, and the very next morning, my father, my uncle, and I traveled to the place where Jared lived. It was about 4 hours of drive, and as we got there, we saw something that was engraved into our memory, and we still get traumatized by the memory of that sight. It was Jared, dead on the sofa. Neighbors called the police because of the smell, and police had just arrived when we got there. Neighbors told us that they had been hearing Jared's screams for the past few nights, and everything went quiet about 3 days ago. No one knew the reason for those mysterious and horrifying clamors that came from Jared's house every night. Police told us that Jared had been dead for at least a couple of days, considering the state of his body. Yet the mystery of his death and his tragic appearance at the Thanksgiving dinner remains unsolved. That was a shock for our family. To lose him on that occasion